Oh, hey everyone. This is my other camera. So how about we change that, shall we? Let's get the right camera looking at me. Hi everyone. So yeah, it's always a little bit of an adventure, but that was a real short one. And I'm now going to get you some theme music to go enjoy for a moment here. Give me a sec on that. Here we go. I said, oh, whatever. Hi, everyone. It's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here with the Music Masterclass. This is April 5th, 6th, 7th, April 7th. Time flies sometimes, and I'm looking forward to talking about some music and talking about some ideas for some things going forward based on some of your suggestions, and we'll be talking about music and talking about future music here. So I'm glad people are here and checking in chat. And hello again, everyone. So let's see. I now have my chat, my special chat window here, so that even when I'm sharing my screen, I can follow the chat, which is really nice. So I do need to take a moment while I'm talking to just set up my the other camera thing on my keys. So just give me one moment on that. In fact, I'm going to share my full screen so you can just watch this process, because it's moderately interesting. It's moderately interesting is the best thing I can say about it. So this is the app that I put together. I call it Visual Piano Studio, and it's what lets me both grab a screen share, and I can grab whether I grab entire screen. I think I'll do that. Sometimes I grab just MuseScore. So I'll grab entire screen so I can look at other things. And now it's sharing my screen, and you get that whole telescope business, or kaleidoscope maybe is a better term. But then I can start my camera, which is the overhead camera. And then I make sure it's actually positioned reasonably. And then I have these cute little sliders that I can slide around and get things to be kind of how I want it to be. So that's all part of my process. I feel like it's tilted. This is on a lamp. So the deal is that sometimes I have time to do all that before I start, and sometimes I just don't. But that's because I teach a class right before this here at the university, and our semester is over in 2 weeks. So, you know, my life gets simpler soon. And I am looking forward to a little more simplicity, a little less hectic of a morning. So that's now my setup. Let's see. What can I tell you here? I said I want to talk about music, and I've got some pieces, I want to talk about. Do I use a regular keyboard? Yeah, just regular keyboard. As far as computer keyboard, you mean? Yeah, definitely just a regular computer keyboard. Regular piano here is what I'm using. Yeah, a lot of this discussion that we had over the last couple of weeks about direction of things, I've got some things I want to share already, and some stuff that's still going to maybe take a minute to figure out. But I'm going to take you over to the community site and show you what I have starting to put in place here. So this is going to be a thing that's going to go in conjunction with a masterclass for people who choose to take part. And I'll make it either part of the All Access membership, or I'll make a separate thing for it that you can sign up for. Not sure exactly how it's going to work. But the idea is to have a group of students who really want to invest in some time in really studying some things and really work on some stuff kind of together as a cohort, kind of like that cohort-based course I did. But this is sort of a, I don't know, similar idea, but different. And I'm calling it the Alt DMA. So there's a guy who has a program called the Alt MBA, which is kind of an alternate Master of Business Administration, right? That's what MBA stands for. And it's not a degree program, but it's something you can sign up for online. And he's a very respected, his name's Seth Godin. He's a big marketing guy. So I want to try to do something similar with music. It's not a music degree, but it's something that would be maybe kind of equally serious. So this is something that I plan to be putting in place after the semester ends, and I have time to think about it. And realistically, it'll more happen after MuseScore 4 comes out, and I have even more time to think about it. But I don't want to wait for all that. We are going to start already doing some things that relate to this. And the things that we're going to start with is this idea of analysis. And so I'm going to talk about analysis some today. So there's a number of things that I've set up here in this Alt DMA area that are just sort of placeholders, nothing really going on. But what we're going to be doing in this form and analysis space here, and again, this will be for the people who choose to take part and sign up and do what, do what I feel like we need to set up for this. We'll be analyzing fairly large scale works, maybe not all really large scale, but at least some of them will be pretty large scale. And we're going to start with Brahms Symphony No. 1, first movement. So people who want to get involved, I'll be opening access to this to the people who are already all access members very shortly, and we'll figure out some other ways of taking part. But then the idea is the people who are taking part in that will be actually doing analysis, and I'll kind of be guiding them. And then we'll, in the master class, every once in a while, we'll, have someone present something and say, hey, here's something I just analyzed, and then we can have a discussion about it, analyze individual little segments of it. That'll sort of be a collaborative thing between me and the people who are taking part in this. So anyone who has any interest in the subject, even if you feel like, oh, no, I'm not going to be able to be totally involved, but I want to know what the music's about, by all means, check out the Brahms Symphony No. 1. And I guess I should post these links to the Music Masterclass area too, and maybe I'll do that. I'll post a copy of this there. But anyhow, that's something that came up during the discussion we had over the last couple of weeks. More analysis and larger works. So yeah, that's something we're going to do, and mostly that's going to be taking place separately from this class. I mean, it's going to be taking place in this Alt DMA area, and we'll figure out exactly what that's like. But I'll probably allocate some time, maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, we'll allocate a half hour or so to talking about the things that we've learned in our analysis. And so that everyone can benefit from the analysis that we'll be doing kind of offline. So that's a little bit of my plan. So what I want to talk about is, well, what does analysis mean? And analysis of larger works in particular, because the thing is, it could mean a ton of different things. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I do want to check on something here first. So give me one moment. One moment to check on something here. All right. So Humble New Music, I don't know if you're here, but if you are here, I do want to take a look at some of your music a bit later. So if you are here, let me know in the chat. And if you're interested in being, live with me, you don't have to be on camera if you don't want, but if you want to come on, but I actually don't see your name in here. So that's fine. I do want to talk about some of that music though. Because there's been so much cool music. So what I want to do is talk about what I even mean by analysis, and because it could mean just so many different things, right? So I'm going to talk about it in the context of this Brahms piece, even though I haven't begun to look at it. But what I'm going to do is show you some of the kinds of things that might come into play. So I'm going to go to my form and analysis thing, and I'm going to, oops, yeah, was that the thing? I think I just saw Okay, never mind. I thought I just saw Beethoven, but did I see Beethoven? No, it says Brahms. I just can't read. Um, so this is a version in MuseScore of the Brahms Symphony No. 1 that someone else created. And as far as I can tell, Jay Wilson, I guess is his name, he seems to have done a really fantastic job of it from what I can tell. I mean, I haven't explored it in great detail, but enough to be pretty impressed with what I'm hearing. So what I'm going to do first is just play the beginning of it, and so that we all understand what kind of piece we're talking about here. This is the piece, it's for an orchestra, but it's a relatively small orchestra. So that's actually the first bit of analysis that we might want to have in mind is, well, what is the instrumentation and how is it being used? This is orchestration as far as what the topic really is. And so if I look at the instrument names here, they're probably too small to really read here. In fact, if I bring up the instruments window, that might be an easier place to see. You can see we have a flute, an oboe, clarinet, but actually it's better to look at it on the score now that I think about it, so we can see how many of each instrument there are. There are 2 flutes on that staff, 2 oboes on this one, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, and a contrabassoon. So as a woodwind section goes, that's actually that's pretty standard. That's when I say it's a slightly scaled down orchestra, it's not the woodwinds that are scaled down. It's the brass that's scaled down, because all we have here are 4 horns. So there's 2 C horns and 2 E flat horns, which is itself unusual on modern standards, but not by classical standards. And then we've got 2 C trumpets, and that's it. There's no low brass. At least there isn't at the beginning. I guess I should look and see. Did he hide empty staves, and so there actually is low brass? No, there's no low brass. There's no trombones, and there's no tuba in this. So this is a slightly scaled down thing. And as far as percussion goes, it's timpani, and that's it. So we have timpani, but there's not snare drum, bass drum, no suspended cymbals, no other percussion instruments. And then the string section is pretty standard. Violin, 2 violin parts, a viola part, a cello part, and a bass part. So, the selection filter. So William, this is definitely something, if you go back and watch the cafe episode from last week, I went through and opened up all the windows, but this is something that lets you copy, control what you're copying. Like if you want to copy music but not copy the lyrics, you can uncheck lyrics there. And when you do that, it will, copy your music but not copy the lyrics, etc. All sorts of fun things you can do with that. And somewhere in a cafe episode, I'm sure I talk about that. But and definitely last week's tour, the tour of the user interface. I'm sure I opened that window, but I didn't go into great detail about it. So that's what we're dealing with here. It's a slightly scaled down orchestra. And I mention this because right off the bat, when we hear this does not sound scaled down. Nothing about what we're going to hear seems small. So I'm going to just start the piece and let you listen for, a little bit. And I'll cut it right there because it's a long piece. We're not going to listen to the whole thing right now. But I wanted to get you a sense of the scope of this piece. That's the beginning section. You can see it goes to a faster tempo here somewhat, Allegro. But it doesn't feel that much faster because it's slower note values. So the things that I am saying right now are part of what I mean by analysis. And Dan, your observation is really good. When I'm only doing, in fact, even though I can't easily do this right now, there's two things I can do. I can go to gallery view, which nope, still leaves my face up there. So I guess there's no way to not do that. But what I can do is temporarily move my dividing line so that it's all screen share. Haha. There we go. So now it's all screen share, not keyboard. So hopefully that helped. Because for the moment here, you're not going to need to see my keys. I'll just have to remember to go back. So let me know if that worked. Oh, am I on the correct mic? Dang it. I did not see that comment. So let's come back here and find out. I was on the correct mic. Now, it could just be because it was too loud. It says I'm on the right mic. And it says I've got my all that stuff on. So if that was distorted, it could have just been too loud, and I should turn down my volume. Tell me about this. How does this sound? Because I have all my levels set where I usually do. You can tell me. It says that I'm on the mic that I'm usually on with the settings I'm usually on. So I would love to think that was fine. Okay, so when we talk about analysis, there's so many things we can actually have in mind, and I'm going to keep my chat open here where I can. Part of the issue is talking about the orchestration, talking about, the fact that it is that whole large orchestra, large-ish. And talk about how he's using these instruments, when he's using the woodwinds, when he's using the brass, when he's using the strings, right? These are orchestration issues. That's part of analysis. But also talking about the fact that there was that whole relatively slow introduction section, and then it goes into a faster section. So this idea of the sections of the piece, looking at it just in terms of, different tempos, slow section, fast section, 3/4 section versus 4/4 section, or whatever, right? The A major section versus the D major section. Not that this piece is in that key. So those are all kinds of things that we would want to be able to do, is break down and really look at the piece at that level. And so there's been a lot of talk lately. Dave's been asking, and there's been other discussions recently about the timeline. The timeline is actually a great tool for understanding these sorts of things, because if I do show the timeline here, then I can visualize some of this stuff. I need to carefully drag that dividing line so I can see all my instruments. There they are. And now I can see, and I can also zoom to fit all of this onto one screen, although it might be crazy to do that. Yeah, I think it's going to be crazy to do that, so I'm not going to. But we can see that there's the slow section there, and here is the Allegro section, and it looks like that tempo rides until the end when it's meno Allegro, less Allegro, right? This is all stuff you can see from the timeline. You can see any meter changes, 6/8, and then it very briefly changes to 9/8, and then back to 6/8. There's the 9/8 measure, and then it stays 6/8. It looks like the rest of the way through. If there's rehearsal marks in this score, which it seems like there's not, those would be marked. But when we do analysis, we could add things as rehearsal marks so they show up there. If there's any key changes, we'll be able to see them in here. Looks like it does change. There's 3 flats there, so there must have been another. Well, it was 3 flats at the beginning, and then still 3 flats there, so I'm not sure. That doesn't really seem like a change, but maybe there was something else going on that I'd have to look at. The bar lines are also an interesting way of looking at things, because it's going to show where there's double bars in the score, because presumably the composer and or editor inserted those at sort of important junctures. So there's all sorts of stuff that we can see, but we can also just see the instrument entrances. Like you can see the brass here has all this kind of grayed out spaces there where they're basically resting. In these measures here, the brass does not have notes. And I would have to scroll down to show you that, but see there's rests in the brass there. And you can see the strings are used by the darker segments here. The strings are playing virtually throughout. The woodwinds are more or less throughout, maybe not as much as the strings, but the brass rests quite a bit. That's pretty typical, and that's the kind of thing also that we would want to look at. Well, when does he bring in the brass? Why does he bring in the brass in here? Why does he let him out here? One reason you don't have him play throughout is, well, one reason is just sonic variety. You want different textures in your music, but another reason is just brass players the actually playing a brass instrument and maintaining that buzz in the lips for 15 minutes straight. It's not nice. It's not nice to the brass player. So Joanne, I see that you're saying that there's a change to E minor. So I just am not seeing it here in the timeline, but I'm going to trust that that you are correct about that. Now, it could be that he does that change just through accidentals, like I see here. That's all stuff that I saw some sharps in, but no, it didn't really seem to be E minor yet. But somewhere there must be an E minor section. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had to be a change back to C minor, and for whatever reason, I'm not finding it. But this is the kind of stuff that, we don't want to spend time during the master class looking for this stuff. We want to have found it ahead of time. And so I'm going to be, hoping that the people who are involved with this whole form and analysis class thing that I'll be setting up can do some of that homework, and then they can present some stuff, and then we can discuss it. But it's also like there might be very particular things that we're interested in that come up as you listen to it. You're like, wait a minute, there's this thing that happened in measure 117 that was really interesting. Let's talk about what the horns were doing there. There's almost no chance that the horns are doing something interesting at measure 117, but since I brought it up, I kind of need to hear it. Horns are doing something interesting there. And now at this point, it's too small for me to see. So I want to zoom back in on my score, and measure 117 is right here. And here's my horns. They're not doing anything interesting. Boom, boom, boom. So they are doing something moderately interesting. Might have the wrong key. Anyhow, that thing that they're doing there, I just made up a place, and so I wanted to see if it did happen to be anything interesting. So yeah, this piece is super duper long and involved. Lots of stuff. How did my zoom get to 69%? So what I did here is I used Control plus two-finger swipe. So two-finger swipe by itself just scrolls up and down, but if I hold Control while doing it, it zooms. So Control two-finger swipe up, Control two-finger swipe down. So I'm just zooming until I see it as big as I want it to be. And I'm going to close the timeline again now, just because it takes up a lot of space. So anyhow, that's one way of zooming. There's other ways of zooming also. But yeah, this ability to zoom things in and navigate around, the bigger the score, the more likely that stuff is to be interesting. So far I've talked about analysis in these really kind of broad terms of just sort of seeing what's involved. But there's more specific stuff that goes on if we want to think about the form of a symphony. So a symphony typically is multiple movements, and we're dealing with the first movement here. And the first movement is typically if there's going to be drama to a symphony, that's the drama, right? This is like that's the first part people hear, and so it's the famous part of it. I mean, sometimes there's famous themes later. In the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, it's the last movement where the Ode to Joy stuff all happens. At least the main Ode to Joy stuff. But most things, like if you think about the Fifth Symphony, right, that whole thing. That's the first movement, right? Mostly it's first movements of things that we are most familiar with the themes from. Sometimes the second movement is the slow movement, and it might also have a memorable theme. Yeah, they could be memorable themes anywhere. But that idea of themes, melodic themes that get reused. A symphony, the first movement could be however long it is. In fact, if I go to the play panel here, I'm going to open the play panel for a second and just jump to the end of the score. And click the last note and see that the play panel tells me it's 15 minutes, 45 seconds in. So yeah, this is 15 minutes. Right? I knew that already. This particular version runs 15 minutes. Here's that key change here. Oh yeah, and look, it is, yeah, I'm not seeing the sharps though, so whatever. In any case, over the course of that 15 minutes, you would think, well, gee, that's a lot of music. But the reality is, most pieces, yeah, for New World Symphony, Movement 2 is the famous one, right? Oh yes, and into that box you can type numbers directly. You can type 69, hit enter, and it should zoom exactly to that figure. That does work. And you can also use the drop down to just, say, 75 is close enough, right? There's all sorts of different ways of zooming. But yeah, so New World Symphony Movement 2 is kind of the famous one, or one of the famous ones. Beethoven Pathétique, which you've probably heard me reference before, the second movement is pretty famous also. And yeah, that's pretty often the case, that the slow movement will have a memorable theme also, or especially memorable. So over the course of the first movement of a symphony, typically they are in what is called sonata form. And we talked about sonata form a year ago, right? When I first kind of opened this master class up wide like I did and started the community and all, I started talking about sonata form, and we started talking about trying to write sonata movements. A symphony is just a big sonata movement. And in the newsletter, I posted a link to where I talked about that in respect to Beethoven's Fifth, the first movement. The or however it goes. I'm doing this by ear. That was not right, but I'm not going to stress it. I'm not going to stress about it. Something like that, right? That theme is the main theme of the symphony. It's the A theme, but then there's a B theme. I don't know what key it's in. Right, that theme. Whether it's in that key or not, I don't remember. But because I'm doing this by ear, the secondary theme is usually maybe a gentler theme, not as gentle as a second movement type of theme might be, but it's still a gentler theme usually than the A theme. Not always, but often. So you've got an A theme and a B theme, and the entire symphony movement is typically spun out of those two themes. But the details of how you do it, well, that's where the interest is. You figure out where did he use that A theme, and where did he use those B themes, and where did he fragment them, use like a little fragment of the A theme and juxtapose it with the B theme. So there's all sorts of things like that come up as a course of analyzing a large-scale work to understand how you get 15 minutes of great music out of two themes. And usually there's a little more going on than just saying, oh, there's only two themes. But a surprising amount of large-scale works can be broken down as really being built out of just a couple of small things and then expanded. So for instance, let me go back to now where you can actually see keys. So I'm going to return to my Visual Piano Studio and change my dividing. Oh, this is freaking me out a little bit, but so you can see my keys. There we go. All right. So, there's in the pathetique first movement, there's this whole beginning thing that's like an introduction. That's not the theme. It's a theme, but the theme is I haven't played that thing in too long, and I'm trying to remember it, but that's the main theme. Something like that. But then there's the second theme, where it goes. That's the second theme. And then he has this development section where he kind of switches back and forth between all three of those things. He makes references to stuff from the introduction, he makes references to this, and he makes references to that, and kind of weaves them all together. And how that all happens, that's a big part of what we mean when we talk about analysis. And Joanne's mentioning also the repeat. And yes, so a typical thing that happens is to make sure that people remember the theme and that it really does what it needs to do. Typically, we'll have our A theme, and then we'll have our B theme, and then we repeat them. And we do that whole A theme again, and that whole B theme again. Pathetique does that. Fifth Symphony of Beethoven does that. This does some version of that also. So that's a very typical thing, that after you've stated those two themes, that's not enough to then start developing them. We just do those two themes again, so that those themes have enough weight to withstand the sort of manipulations that the composer is going to do while developing those themes, so that we've really understood those themes. Because this is the music is designed to be heard and experienced live. It should stand up to analysis, but live, if you only hear a theme once and then 10 minutes later you hear it again, I'm not going to say you would never remember it, but it's not the same as if you've heard that theme a couple of times. Then when it's developed, you're like, oh yeah, I recognize that because I've heard it twice before, as opposed to I heard it once before. Now when you hear a development of it, the more familiar that theme is to you, the more you're going to recognize a variation on it when it appears later. So yeah, that idea, and of course once you've heard the piece, and then you've heard the piece maybe 4 or 5 times, then you might recognize a variation right off the bat. You wouldn't need to have heard that whole exposition. That's what we call the A theme and B theme together, exposition. You wouldn't have necessarily needed to hear that exposition repeated in order to understand that, oh yeah, this thing I'm hearing is a variation on that theme, because you heard that theme yesterday, you heard that theme last week. But we want it to be just as powerful on first hearing, and that's where repetition really comes in handy. So anyhow, the idea of that whole structuring and how much weight we give to the exposition versus how much weight we give to the other parts of the thing. By the way, before I forget, just humor me for a moment. I want a screenshot of what I'm doing right now, that you can see the music, my keys. For some reason, every once in a while, my home key doesn't work. All right, but I want this view here. Yeah, this view here is good enough, but with the chat in here. I just want to screenshot this for a second because I need to use this for something, and I can blur out people's names if you want. But I'm going to just do a quick screenshot. There we go. All right. Thanks for humoring me. So in any case, all of this stuff is part of analysis. But, I spent all of last month essentially talking about harmony, and I'm about to start talking about harmony again, and then we'll look at some other music. Understanding how Brahms has used harmony. Why does he change from C minor to E minor? That's crazy. That doesn't happen normally. In fact, even that Beethoven example where he goes from C minor and then the second theme is in E flat minor. If you think about it, C minor has 3 flats in the key signature. E flat minor has 6 flats in the key signature. This is not a closely related key. Similarly, going from E flat minor to E minor, which I'm going to take your word for it, Joanne, that it happens because I still haven't done my homework on this piece. But I'm going to assume that if I keep scrolling and keep scrolling, I will see some E minors. I see some E minor looking stuff here. Maybe so. Maybe not. It's hard to tell because there's some modulation going on in there. But usually modulations are to what we say are related keys. And, this going from C minor to E minor is going from 3 flats to 1 sharp. That's, again, not related at all. They're very distant on the circle of fifths. So had 2 sharps. Okay, in that case, that's even further. If we go from C minor to either D major or B minor, that's even more distant. That's even more distant because now it's 3 flats to 2 sharps, and I'm trying to draw where they might be on the circle of fifths. Those are almost diametrically opposed. That's almost as far apart on the circle of fifths as you can get from 3 flats to 2 sharps. 3 flats to 3 sharps would be as far distance as you can get, but 3 flats to 2 sharps is 5 ticks along the circle different. After 6 ticks, that's as far as you can get. 7 ticks is just 5 ticks the other way. So this way of thinking about modulations, how many ticks on the circle of fifths did we go? That's a big part of this too, and it creates a very dramatic feel when we do more distant modulations. So anyhow, that's all the kinds of things that we might talk about. So I talk about key changes as part of it, but then even so, we can look within it. When I said that passage before was modulating, what do I mean by that? How is he accomplishing that modulation? This is all good stuff to know. This looks like a relatively simple passage here. When I say it's relatively simple, I don't see an accidental in sight, right? So I know it's all diatonic here. Furthermore, I see the low instruments doing what's called pedal point. They're all bum, 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 bum. They're all kind of hanging on that G. So there's other stuff going on above it. And then all that stuff going on top of the G. It's basically creating tension over a G chord. It's creating a really tense 5 chord. It's called a dominant pedal when you do that, and that's it's a tension building technique, and we'd want to understand what that's happening, but then also understand what's happening in a passage where maybe there's more straightforward things going on harmonically. So I would want to look at what the chords were that were moving through there. Do we need to analyze every single chord to say we've analyzed something? Well, no. Maybe we focus on the parts of it that are especially interesting to us. Some of it, if we can listen to it and go, well, that sounds pretty standard kind of stuff, and I could probably figure it out if I tried, then maybe that's the stuff you don't bother trying. If there's a passage you're like, I have no idea what's going on there. Give me a minute here. We got to look at that and understand this. That's some of the stuff we really want to dig into. On the other hand, knowing how to do the simple stuff is important too. And that makes a good segue. So, okay, so Joanne, you mentioned about measure numbers on every measure. I'll show you how to do that because, yeah, all these things, learning how to use MuseScore to do these things is going to be useful. So I will show that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Format, Style, Measure Numbers, and I'm going to set, instead of every system here, I'm going to say interval, and I'm going to set that interval to 1. And that means every measure as a measure number. Now, when you do that, they show up on the top staff only normally. In that same dialog box was an option to make it appear on all staves. But there they are. Now, they're kind of in the way here, and that's one reason we don't typically do it this way. We need to format them differently, move them closer to the staff, and I have to move them around manually. And so I typically don't show measure numbers on every staff, but on every measure. But it's very useful when you're analyzing something to see them, and then you don't worry about are they colliding with some notes, because I don't care. I just want to know what measure it is. Another thing you can do, though, is just click the measure and then look down in the status line. It'll tell you it's measure 363. Sometimes that measure number will be off because this measure, the measure numbers here don't count the pickup, but the measure numbers in the status line do. So occasionally they can be off by one or more than one if you've done some other things like first and second endings or splitting a measure in half for various reasons. Any number of things can make these be a little bit out of sync. But in any case, that is also something you can reference there, is that status line. All right, so when I talked about learning how to do the simple things well, here's where, when I said that I wanted to talk to Humble New Music, look at some of his music here, or her music, because I still don't know. I want to see if you're here. Looks like not. But I still want to talk about the music, and then we'll talk about more some other time. I did send out a little heads up, but not with enough warning, I think, to be useful. But I do want to talk about it because that New World came up. And dang, if he or she didn't have a piece based on it to look at. So I want to look at that piece, and I want to look at one other that I thought was especially interesting. So here's the New World one, and here's the other one. And I think I'm going to close that Brahms one because it's so... Yeah, no, I want to have it there because who knows if I'm not going to want to flip back to it. I'm going to start with the New World one. So this is was created as a reharmonization of the melody from that New World Symphony that we were just mentioning before. And it's actually, well, it's really interesting, but there's some things that I want to talk about with it and then contrast it with the other one. I'm actually going to double the tempo on this because it is extremely slow as it is, slower than the original symphony would normally be played, and I think it stands up to the doubling of the tempo pretty well also. So let's hear it. Yeah, the timeline will also show you measure numbers, but again, you might have the same trouble of can I read them that small. So let's listen to this piece. It's not very long. I'm just going to play it all the way through. Actually, that's a little fast. I'm going to take it down to maybe 52 is not 520, 52. Let's try this. Really nice. And that last phrase, by the way, is highlighted in blue because that little bit of music, I'm transposing as I'm playing this. That's the Ron Miles piece, Witness, that I played a few weeks ago. So there's a lot of really nice things going on in this. And I had said, well, I would love it if you could tell me more about what your thinking is in terms of like putting some Roman numeral analysis on this so that we can understand the intent better. But I'm going to take advantage of the fact that that Humble the Music is not present to make some guesses, and then later on they can respond and see what kinds of things I'm looking for. So I would want to understand things like, in this first measure, I would want to understand what the intent was here. We see this chromatic motion here. Was that chromatic motion, and I'm actually going to switch to concert pitch view so I don't have to transpose. And I'm going to cheat also. I don't want to read alto clef because I just don't. So you've probably seen me do this before. I'm going to switch it to treble clef with the 8 below it. So this note here is middle C. Now realistically, I knew that was a middle C. I can read alto clef well enough to know the middle line is middle C. That's how it works. But after that, I got to do math and think too hard. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let that clef be the one I changed it to so I can more easily see the pitches. So there's that chromatic line. And one of the things that I want to understand is, were those notes intended to be harmonically significant or not? So if I look at the chord that's happening here, and then I'm ignoring the violin 1 part, just looking at the violin 2, viola, cello, and melody. If I ignore the violin 1 part, I have, it's all just a 1 chord, right? Now the next, and so this, though, motion is a typical motion in some kind of, this is familiar to me in a jazz pop kind of sense. These 6 chords, those kinds of motions are familiar to me as sort of inner voice motions that aren't meant to be harmonically significant. But it is the case that that G flat, if I play, that G flat is now forming a 1 chord as a dominant 7th. And so I would like to think that the intent here was to say, yes, this is a dominant 7th, to tonicize the next chord. But the next chord that's actually here, I have an A flat, a D flat, and an E flat with a B flat also in it. And what I'm not sure is what the intent is here. And so if I heard that A flat 7 chord, I expect it to go to D flat. In other words, I expect that to be a 1 dominant 7th going to 4, 5 of 4 going to 4. And so I sort of expected that. Then I might have expected this, a 4 chord. But I didn't really get a 4 chord. There is this F here, but the violin is continuing to move across it. So I'm not saying that to say that there's anything wrong with any of this. It sounds really nice, but I'm not understanding the intent. And the reason why understanding the intent could be a consideration here, it just has to do with, well, what was the goal in writing this? The goal, or at least the challenge that I put forth, was to take a familiar melody and reharmonize it according to very specific principles, right? In my how to create a great chord progression workshop, I talked about basically 2 principles. I talked about tonicization, which is that idea of 5 of 4 going to 4, and I talked about borrowed chords, right? The idea of using that minor 4 chord. Those were the 2, and yeah, a couple other things. I did talk about other diminished chords that can be used and how they could be used. But mostly I talked about 2 techniques, and I really wanted to see those techniques specifically being employed. And so I see things and hear things in this that feel like they might be trying to be that, but I don't know if they are or not. So those are some of the things that I would want to understand about this. Was it trying to convey that sound? 5 of 4 to 4, and just chose to do it with interesting voicings? If so, great. Because at this moment, just that moment, these notes, if if I imagined D flat as the root of that chord, I could be okay with that. I could say, yeah, that was an interesting voicing of a D flat chord. I might question whether the cello really should hold the A flat the entire time. I don't know if we have any cello players here, but you know, the idea of writing this as either a double stop or using a D flat as a grace note. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm just going to make this little oops, not there. I'm going to add a little D flat here. And I don't need my headphones on for any of this. So I'm just going to add that little hint of a D flat. The idea being it might make me understand it as a D flat chord more. Yeah, I barely even heard that D flat, so that wasn't enough to do it. But what if I did it as a double stop? I'm going to get rid of that thing, and this time add the actual D flat. So I could do that. Now, I'm not saying that that was the original intent, but this is all about what I'm trying to understand, what the intent was, whether we were trying to get a D flat sound, and if so, is it worth making it sound more like a D flat? Is it worth making it clearer that that is a 4 chord? Yes, there was a D flat in the viola, but not in a register that allowed me to understand it as a root, especially given the presence of the color tone E flat in the second violin and the presence of basically a melody that doesn't relate to the E flat triad at all, right? None of those notes are in a D flat triad. So I don't know that the intent was to create that, but here again I see something that looks like 5 of 4. I see something I could possibly interpret as 4 for it to lead to. So to understand how to suggest the best way to move around with this, where to go forward with it, I would want to know what the goal was. But also, if the goal was to employ the techniques of the workshop, then definitely you want this to be a 4 chord so that you've tonicized it with the note that looks like it was meant to tonicize something. So this kind of talking about harmony is if we're going to analyze Brahms, I'm not going to be second guess him. I'm not going to be second guessing Brahms. I'm not going to ask Brahms to give me Roman numerals. I'm going to look at what he wrote and let him teach me what he meant, and by analyzing it and figuring it out. But if I'm looking at any student work basically, or member of this community piece created as a way of addressing an assignment or a challenge, then yeah, I think these are all fair questions to ask. So the way that I analyze Brahms is going to be different than the way I analyze humble new music, because one is assuming that they're absolutely right and I need to learn from it, and one is an assumption of how could we maybe clarify your intent here, let understand the intent and clarify it. So I did say I wanted to contrast that with another piece. I do just want to put this other piece up for a second because it really is very, very nice. The other piece, and it's a setting of Jesus, Joy of Man's Desiring, English thing. I can pronounce German well enough, but I've never actually thought about the title in there. Jesus bleibet meine Freude, right? Bleibet, desire. Okay, to desire, I guess. Okay. So this is also reharmonized, and I feel this is reharmonized in a way that is clearer in terms of intent. This piece was actually created like a year ago, but I somehow didn't notice it. I don't know if it was posted into the community or only to MuseScore.com, but I'm going to play it also because it's also not very long, and it's just pretty. And it's got lots of nice things I could talk about, but this one maybe I'll talk about further some other time if Humble New Music can make it. Yeah, that's just really pretty. So William, you're asking about why didn't Bach put slurs over the notes? Well, first of all, it's important to realize we're not looking at what Bach wrote, right? We're looking at what Humble New Music wrote, rearranging the Bach piece. And so another question of that is, okay, even if you are looking at a printed edition, a published edition of Bach, and you don't see the slurs, that doesn't mean Bach didn't put them there. It means the editor of that version didn't put them there. Those details are typically added by editors, not written in by composers. Some composers pay attention to those details, but many don't. Many write manuscripts that are quite sketchy and expect their editors to fill in those details. But another thing is, like, let's find an example of what you're talking about. It's also a stylistic thing. So, like, Lustunzone. So this Lustun. So to do this by modern standards, we expect to see the extenders there so that there's a line going there. So you hit underscore to create those. And then also, in addition, you expect to see a slur over it. But neither of those are universally found. And if you look back at throughout history at different editions of vocal music, there have been times when people use slurs but not extenders, and there's times when people use extenders but not slurs. The idea of using extenders but not slurs is probably a bigger deal in music in which you're trying to simplify things. Like a lead sheet, for instance, we don't typically use slurs at all. We just use the extenders. But also in a lot of music where we're going for vocal effects and we're trying to create very specific vocal effects, then we'll use slurs to mean something other than melisma, but something to do with how you're using your breath, not necessarily the words. The use of vowel versus consonant and where you're breathing and stuff. So there's other uses that some kinds of music will use slurs for. Like, I hate to use the word like experimental music or modern music because people have been doing this for like 100 years. But those are all different variations in how people notate things. So in any case, I wouldn't get too hung up on whether they're present, but yeah, I would say something should be there. There's no reason not to at least include one or the other. If it were me, I would put in the extenders but not the slurs because I'm used to lead sheets where we don't use slurs so much. Anyhow, there's lots that I will be able to tell you about this at some point. So yeah, different notations. The slurs normally mean melisma in vocal music. I'm just saying that there are composers who will say, you know what, you can figure out melisma just by looking at the lyrics and the extenders. I want to use slurs to mean the same thing they mean for other instruments, which has nothing to do with melisma. It's related maybe, but it's a different thing. It has to do with the sound quality. So some composers will be more interested in that. But yeah, there's really interesting things going on harmonically here that are much easier for me to then sort out what the intent was and talk about what's going on and so forth. But what I would definitely encourage you to take a look at this piece that was just posted to the community a couple days ago. But the thing that I'll say about it is overall the trick that is often used, like here, that normally resolves to a G major chord. Normally that went to the 1 chord, but there was a choice to go to instead tonicize an E minor chord, the 6th chord. So there's any number of places where that sort of substitution has happened, where instead of targeting a 1 chord, it targets a 6th chord, or instead of targeting 4, it targets 2, or different substitutions like that based on what other chords can harmonize that melody note, which will always be chords a third apart, right? That G could be harmonized by either a G chord or an E minor chord or a C chord. Those are the 3 triads that harmonize that G as a chord tone. And it could also be made, a non-chord tone. Now it's the 9th of an F chord. So there's a lot of attention to that sort of detail in here, and that's, I think, done very effectively. And then the actual chord progression works pretty well too. So yeah, lots of that I'll talk about this at some future time. But as it is, I think I need to wrap up and get on to my next thing here. So I want to thank everyone for being here. And let me come back to my music to close us out. So thanks again, everyone, for being here for the Music Masterclass. I always just have a lot of fun doing this, getting to talk about music and getting to talk about your music and getting to talk about great works now. Because I think we are going to work a little more of that kind of talk into things. And you'll be hearing more from me in coming weeks about how I'm setting up all that form and analysis section and all this stuff. So stay tuned. Lots of exciting things coming. And keep writing music, and by all means check out that Brahms piece if you have any interest at all in following along or participating. Check out the Brahms, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye everyone.